Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I want to begin by thanking Pat and David for coming to Airdrie and speaking tonight. And, you know, they are very good examples of two of the most successful Scots, not just successful in Scotland, not just successful in Britain, but internationally and globally successful Scots who have travelled the world, who have worked throughout the world, who know what it's like to live in a prosperous country. And it's not insignificant that people like Pat and David are on the yes side of this campaign, and people should listen to what they are saying. The one thing I would say to Pat, though, is I hope he recognises the utter bravery of Michael Coyle in inviting a man from Coke Bridge to come and speak in Airdrie. Earlier today, in my role as the Health Minister, I was up in Stirling along with Dennis Canavan. We were visiting a care home which Dennis is a patron of. And we were reminiscing about the time that Dennis and I spoke at an Everpole rally in the October 1974 election, and we spoke in a small mining village called Fallin in West Stirlingshire, which was Dennis's constituency. And two of us remember that year, just before that election, a famous, and that time famous document that was published by an organisation called the National Children's Bureau, an excellent organisation that is still around, although it's been renamed in the intervening period. The National Children's Bureau in Scotland, in 1974, and I was very, very young at the time, I have to tell you, produced a document called Born to Fail. Born to Fail. And what that document stated was that one third of all the children born and living in Scotland in 1974 were born to fail. And they were born to fail for three reasons: high levels of unemployment, poor housing, and low levels of income in dire poverty. Now, in the intervening period between 1974 and 2014, we're in a similar situation today, with a quarter of our children in Scotland born to fail. We thought in 1974 that unemployment was unacceptably high when 100,000 people were unemployed in Scotland. Now, despite the efforts of John Swinney, which is limited because of the immense limitations on the power he has, unemployment in Scotland is 150,000 and has been well over 200,000 in the Thatcher years. And nationally, across the UK, it is now acceptable to have 2.5 million people unemployed without work. Now, I started in politics when I was 15. I joined the Labour Party Young Socialists, and when I went to university, I was the chair of both the Scottish and the UK National Organisation of Labour Students, and my first job in leaving university was as the first ever research officer for the Labour Party in Scotland. So my background is a Labour background. I'm from Ayrshire mining stock. And the reason I joined the Labour Party was because I believed that the Labour Party would deliver full employment, would deliver better education, would deliver a better health service, would eliminate poverty and deprivation. because that's what the Labour Party was there to do. And I was involved as a research officer in 1974 in writing a document called Labour's Programme for Britain, which was one of the most radical manifestos ever published by any British political party ever, promising much to Scotland, including an oil fund, including nationalisation of the oil industry, including the establishment of an offshore supplies office to make sure people in Scotland got their jobs benefit from North Sea oil and gas. But Labour didn't get elected with a majority in either of the 74 elections. It was a minority government and could not deliver on that radical manifesto, on that radical programme. And I'm sad to say, in the intervening period, since 1974, the Labour Party, the leadership, not the membership or the supporters, the leadership of the Labour Party has gone from the principles that dominated Labour's programme for Britain to become a pseudo-Tory party under Tony Blair and, disappointingly, under Gordon Brown. And you know, one of the great tragedies, and what the Labour Party itself has never been prepared in Scotland to face up to, is that in all of that period, without exception, in every Westminster election in Scotland, the Scottish people have voted Labour. Not by a small margin, but by overwhelming margins, they've voted Labour. And in that period, in that 40, 50-year period, the Scottish people's condition has gone from bad to worse. Now, I joined the Labour Party and my priority has always been full employment and the elimination of poverty. Because if people are in work, they have dignity, they have respect, they have a reason to get up in the morning. A man and a woman can face their children because they know they can look after their children. They can make sure their children get the travel and the books and the standard of housing they need to go on in the world. You cannot do that if you are unemployed. And under Tony Blair, Labour accepted the Tory maxim that there is no longer such a thing achievable as full employment. That's not true. If you go down to London today, the level of unemployment in London is 2.2%, 1/3 of what it is in Scotland. And over this so-called recovery period, over the last year, 80% of the new jobs created have been in the London area. And the other 20% has been shared by the rest of the population. Now in Britain now we have a population of 60 million. Greater London has a population of 15 million. So 80% of the jobs went to the 15 million in London and 20% of the jobs went to the other 45 million to share out amongst themselves. And yet the unionist politicians, the Alistair Darlings, the Gordon Browns, tell us that we've got to remain part of what they call this successful state called Britain. Gordon made a statement 2 weeks ago saying that we had to stick together We had to have unity of purpose to deliver social justice. How can we deliver social justice in Scotland when we continually get outvoted by the people south of the border because they prefer a Tory government to a progressive government? Why should the Scottish people always have to pay the price of right-wing Labour governments and very right-wing Tory governments? And during that period since 1974, when the number of children in poverty is still at a ridiculous level, when the number of pensioners living in poverty, the number of disabled people living in poverty, the number of people who are unemployed in Scotland has remained so stubbornly high. During that period, there's been £300 billion of oil revenues alone go into the Treasury in London. Now, somebody said to me yesterday, why is it they want to keep Scotland? Why don't they let us, if we're so poor and so non-viable, why don't they just privatise us and let us have our independence? And there are two answers to that question. The first one is, despite the propaganda, by value, there's as much, if not more, oil still left in the North Sea and in the west of Scotland. Now, Jim and I in the SLP, we argued, I think, rightly and morally at the time, in the 70s, that there should be an oil sharing policy between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Because without that, we would have, at that time, impoverished the rest of the United Kingdom. I still believe in an oil sharing policy, but an oil sharing policy with a difference. They're for their share, now it's time that we get it. And the other reason they want to keep us is because they want a depository in the Clyde for weapons of mass destruction. And the people of Scotland do not want to have nuclear weapons on their soil or in their waters. Correct. We don't want the English people to have that either. But the only way we can change that is by voting for independence. Now, I know a lot of Labour voters are worried that a yes vote would be a vote for the SNP and for Alex Salmond. Let me tell you this. A yes vote is exactly that. A yes vote for independence. The only way the SNP can get re-elected in an independent Scotland is if the people in the election in 2016 decide to vote for the SNP and for Alec, which obviously I hope they do, because I don't want to be unemployed in 2016. But let me tell you this. A yes vote is not a vote for Alec, but a no vote is a vote for David Cameron. And I also want to tell you this. They are going about saying, vote no and you'll get a more powerful parliament. They must think our heads button up the back. We've had that from Sir Alec Douglas Hume 50, 40 years ago. I didn't believe it then, but too many folk did. Let us not be kidded again. I'll tell you this, far from getting a more powerful Parliament, they'll take the powers away from the Parliament. And don't forget, a no vote is a guarantee that we will have to take our share of the cuts that George Osborne has already promised. £25 billion of cuts if the Tories get back in, half of it on welfare, on the poorest people. And the tragedy is that Miliband and Balls have adopted that policy as well. And therefore, a no vote is a vote for more of the bedroom tax, for more unemployment, for more poverty and desperation and deprivation. And let me tell you this, even about devolved powers. I'm the Cabinet Secretary for Health. And everybody will tell you health is a devolved matter. But one of the biggest challenges to the health service in Scotland just now is being able to get doctors to work in out of hours services. And one of the reasons so few of them are prepared to do it is because of the pension reforms introduced by the Tory government. Now, these pension reforms weren't introduced as a result of consultation with the Scottish government. They weren't introduced with our acquiescence. Indeed, we have actively opposed these pension reforms. But these pension reforms have the potential to do enormous damage to the health service in Scotland. And that is just one example of the limitations, the severe limitations of devolution. And now it's not often at a meeting like this in Airdrie you get Enoch Powell quoted. But he used to say, quite rightly in the House of Commons, power devolved from the House of Commons is power retained by the House of Commons. Because the House of Commons, without a written constitution, can take back the powers at any time it decides to do so. And I'll tell you now, if we vote no, they'll never ever take us seriously again. They'll feel as though they can kick us up and down any way they want to. And they'll be able to take back any power they want to, because their calculation rightly will be that the Scots will huff and puff, but when the time comes, we won't do the necessary. So I say to everybody in here that this vote on the 18th of September is absolutely vital for the future of Scotland. To those who've got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I'm one of them, not great-grandchildren yet, but we owe it to them. We owe it to every poor child in Scotland. We owe it to every unemployed person in Scotland, to every poor pensioner. We owe it to the disabled community who are getting hammered stupid by these welfare reforms. We owe it to them to make sure that we do the right thing on the 18th of September. And there is only one way to guarantee our future, not just as a nation, but as a prosperous nation, and as a fair nation, as a fully employed nation, and as a poverty-free nation. The only way we can achieve that is by a massive yes vote on the 18th of September. I'll tell you this in closing. I don't want to waken up on the 19th of September knowing that we've blown it. I hope you don't either. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec. You've really set the whole on fire, but the main headliner tonight is Jim Sillars, and he's going to speak about his book In Place of Fear 2. So I'll hand you over to Jim Sillars. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and friends and comrades, long time since folk in the Labour Party heard that word, is it no? The other side give the title to their campaign Project Fear. Now think about that. Who is it we're supposed to be feared of? We're supposed to be feared of ourselves. Supposed to believe that we ourselves, I'm frightened of him, and he's frightened of me, and she's frightened of her. Why should the Scots be frightened of each other? We are a well-educated people, we're an intelligent people, we're no different from anybody else in the whole of Europe or the world. Why should we be afraid of each other? Well, I've got a message for Alistair Darling. We're going to win. And at 1 minute past 10 p.m. on the 18th of September, the bells will ring, because the sovereignty we had between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. is still in our hands, and we can do what this nation wants. My wife Margot says they're no better together, they're bitter together. The Lib Dems hate the Tories detest the Lib Dems, and both of them hate the Labour Party. They're only united on one thing. They want to keep us because, as Alex explained, we are a valuable part of the United Kingdom, and they would like to keep us. But they're not going to keep us, because the answer to Project Fear is we're no feared at all. When I came to look at Scotland about 8 or 9 months ago, we were flatlining. There didn't seem to be any movement in the nation whatsoever in respect to the potential that lies in a yes vote. Now, I live in a very middle-class area of Edinburgh. My daughter lives in a very middle-class area of Ayr. My son lives in a middle-class area of Inverness. My 2 stepdaughters in Edinburgh live in middle-class areas there. But that doesn't stop me being working class. I'm the same person who put coal in the engine of a steam engine when I was a boy. I've been skint, I've been unemployed, I've been made redundant, and I know exactly how it feels if you're a working class person and they rig the labour market against you and you can't either get a job or earn the wage to which your labour is entitled. So I sat down and said, look, to myself, it's you can put it down to age if you like. let me tell you, it's easier talking to myself in a house. When I fought the Govan by-election, one night at 10 o'clock, we were wrapping up for the night, and everybody said, oh, it's great to be going home, and somebody said, oh, no, for Jim, he's gone home to a public meeting. But having talked to myself, I thought, what would make a working class family in one of the working class areas of Scotland come out to vote yes in the referendum? What would it be that would make it worth their while? That would enthuse them, that would inspire them, that would convince them, not about hope, but about certainty. And so I sat down to write the book, for them. That's who the book's written for. We have to understand that if you're going to have a better society in Scotland, it has to be based upon socialist principles and a socialist programme. That's the only way we're going to get a good society. And I took myself out of the mindset of the United Kingdom. And if I may say so to my colleagues in the SNP, I think the problem with the white paper is it's still in the mindset of the United Kingdom. I went completely outside and said, just imagine, we at 10:01, that's us, we're free. What would you do in those circumstances? Well, you do something very different from the past. We need an entirely different economic model to work for the Scottish people. Pat alluded to the fact that in that book I mentioned the changes taking place in the world. Way back in 1992 in Pennylee and Govan, I addressed a very large audience as part of the election hustings, and I explained then that after almost 400 years of world power being exercised by the Atlantic axis, the United States and Western Europe, power had changed to Asia and the Pacific, where the rising powers of China and India and Vietnam, Thailand and Indonesia meant that the next 100 to 200 to 300 years meant that that was the place where power was going to be, and that we, a small country of 5 million people, had to find our way in that new world. Well, my opponent, who actually won the election, got up and said, it's all right listening to Jim about the Asia Pacific. What we need is a Labour government, to wild applause, because that apparently was the magic pill. Well, years later, we have to understand there ain't no magic pill. There's either a programme that works, or there's a programme like the one we've got now that doesn't work. And that is the fundamental point the Scots have got to understand. Now, the pillars of the argument in my book are about managing the resources of this country of ours. And the greatest resource we have is our people. And that guided me to education. Now, we've got 32 local education authorities, 32 directors of education, 32 bureaucracies. A lot of the money given to education never ever hits the schools. And it's important that we understand the role of education. In China, the top 50 universities are producing 600,000 engineering graduates a year. We've got to find our place in that kind of world. And it has to be done by a massive concentration of education. Not just in the areas that are doing okay. My greatest concern is in those areas of maximum social deprivation. Those children, Alec, are still born to fail. I can remember debating Born to Fail in the Scottish Grand Committee down in Westminster. Born to Fail in 1973-74. And today we have 250,000 children living in poverty who were born to fail. We cannot allow that to happen, and it need not be allowed to happen. So how do we tackle it? We've got to get more money into schools in the hands of head teachers? Well, we reduced 32 local authorities down to 5 joint boards. Still local authority, but they're joint boards. And that'll give us between 400 and 500 million saving without an extra penny on the budget into the schools. Not only that, it'll come as a surprise to many people. Are you aware that the private schools in Scotland get an 80% reduction in their council tax because they can claim charitable status? Fettes, where that great man Tony Blair was educated, it has, on paper, a council tax liability of £209,000, but it only pays £41,000 because of the 80% reduction. Wester Hales in Edinburgh, in a deprived area, 40% of the children on free meals. It doesn't get the 80% reduction, it pays £261,000 a year. And that's the same all over. Now I looked at the Charities Act, and the test for a charity at school is what they call public good. Do you do public good? Well, just think about it. Fettes and Blair, Hamilton Academy, Fettes and Blair, public good. Govan High School, Hamilton Academy, Jimmy Reid and Margaret MacDonald. Who is doing more public good? Of course a state school does more public good. Now, they would say, oh, but that's the law. Well, as Nye Bevan said, you've got to be able to think what they tell you not to think. You've got to be able to say what they tell you not to say. And more importantly, you've got to be able to do what they tell you you can't do. A socialist government in Scotland, quite simple. You alter the Act. The Act says because state schools are paid by the government, they can't be charitable. That's what they say. We can alter that and say that is removed. State schools are the same as Fettes. And just think of the extra money that would pour in there. And then what do we do with it? We've got areas of multiple deprivation. What I'm arguing is, as well as the head teacher having more money, better teachers, more autonomy in the classrooms, that inside each secondary school is created a community development department. And its job is to deal with the problems outside the school in the deprived areas which the teachers cannot deal with inside the school. We're going to try and reach out to people, not write them off the way they're written off, but use skilled community development workers to work with the community to ensure that the children in the deprived areas get the same chance as everybody else. And the other thing we can do, we can give free school meals to every primary school children. I mean, I must tell you, I'm damned if I understand why you say a child in primary 3 is hungry and needs a free school meal, and the day they become primary 4, somehow or other they're going to say 1 to 7. And I'll tell you, all the research, some of it south of the border, shows that if a child is well nourished, it has an enormous benefit for their educational development. And the other thing is about reaching out, producing nursery places free from 1 to 5 in the deprived areas. Dr. Harry Burns, who's a very fine chief medical officer, has done a great deal of work on this, and there's research all over the place, that the early years of a child's development are absolutely essential to their later prospects in life. That's why we produce nursery in my programme from 1 to 5 in the deprived areas and 3 to 5 in all the other areas in Scotland. So there's a massive concentration from a socialist programme on education. We don't want any more Scottish children born to fail. Somebody... You know, I'm sick and tired of folks saying I'm proud to be Scots. What the hell are we proud of? What are we proud of? 250,000 children in poverty, schools which cannot cope with the problems because the social factors outside make it difficult for the teachers, unemployment where they rejoice because it's 6%, not 7%. That's nothing to be proud of. We've got to make a country that we are proud of, and we can do that. And that brings me to the next point, jobs. How do you create jobs? Well, they keep telling you it's difficult. It's not difficult. We've got 157,000 families on the housing waiting list. How do you how do you tackle? You build houses. I mean, there's nothing, it's like 2 and 2 is 4. You folk on the waiting list, you build houses, and they're housed. I mean, there's nothing complicated about it. If we had a programme of 25,000 new house buildings a year, then we solve the problem in a very quick time. Oh, you can't pay for that, they say. Well, I've lived and worked in the Middle East for a very long period of time after they evicted me from Govan. And I know quite a bit about finance from the Middle East. Islamic finance is different from what you get from the RBS and all the rest. Islamic finance requires the investor to take a risk and not take interest. He can take what they call yield, certainly, a profit off it. But if it fails, he gets nothing. Now it's called a sukuk. That's what the Islamic financial instrument is called. And in Abu Dhabi and in Qatar, they're rolling in money looking for investments. Cameron's got a sukuk, hasn't he? Tell folk that, but it's only worth about 70 odd million £. He's sort of testing the waters. An independent Scottish government could go to Abu Dhabi and Qatar and say, we can offer a sukuk. It's about real estate, which my Arab friends like. It's building houses, which is real estate, which produces rents, which can guarantee your yield. Nay bother at all in building houses for the homeless. That's one way. Just think of the construction jobs, the real apprenticeships, and building those houses. There's a whole trail of folk actually employed when you start construction. Then I had an idea. All these young wains round about 16 to 20 on some of the housing schemes, whom folk